Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for our webinar today. We're going to cover the 5 tiers of storage for new video production workflow, the sequel. Before we start, I want to get some housekeeping items off of the table. We'd like to do this in an informal way, so if you have questions throughout, just go ahead and ask them. We've also attached a number of excellent links and informational resources in the attachment section, so you can go ahead and click on that and take a look at your leisure. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. We're still on this title slide here. We have done the first one of these about 18 months ago. I have Nick Smith with me. You'll see a picture of him as I move the next slide. And Nick, ever since we did the first one, I keep on getting the same question over and over again. Guess what that question is?
No, why is my head so bald?
No, it's when are you guys going to come out with a sequel? And now we can finally answer that question. Yeah, there we go. Here's a sequel. Obviously, that's the voice of Nick Smith, JB&A VP of Technology. Nick, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone?
Well, you just did. I'm Nick Smith. I'm the VP of Technology for JB&A. And in all intents and purposes, I'm just a big nerd. I'm a geek about technology. So I got the ultimate gig, which is to play with tech all day long, test it, break it, figure out what works and what doesn't work, and come up with new and interesting ideas around technology. So it's a lot of fun. And we were struggling with this one because remember, No, go ahead. I was going to say, we were struggling. Do we call it sequel or redo?
Yeah, redo. Or what else were we calling it? Part two, but that one didn't.
Yeah, part two. That was my favorite.
Yeah. But yeah, in all honesty, we put this webinar together 18 months ago, and we were really going over the tiers of storage and how they're applicable. You'll see the agenda in a bit. But a lot has changed in those 18 months, and we'll talk about that as we present the next few slides. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. This is just a Caringo overview slide. If you're not that familiar with Caringo, we're object storage pioneers. We've been around for some time now, market hardened version 11. We have a number of customers across a lot of different industries, but our targets are really media entertainment. That includes sports video and houses of worship and educational videos and high-performance computing, and also federal and local governments. And how about JB&A, Nick? What do you guys do?
So, one, we're your distributor, so we help you guys, go to market, find new avenues, new opportunities. We manage a channel of dealers. So we bring products like yours to market or expand the market for them by connecting them with end users and dealers who need the products. And, we kind of fit across the board from post-production and broadcast and AV. We have a really wide selection of technologies that are all designed to make life better.
Better. And that's why we have JB&A on this, and specifically Nick on us, or with us on this webinar. They bring just a wealth of knowledge. You guys have had a ton of deployments out there in the market, and you cover just about every aspect from the IT perspective for media entertainment organizations. And that's why we like having you guys on the webinar with us. And here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the video landscape. We'll give an update on what's happened in the last 18 months. A lot has happened, obviously, in the last 18 months. We'll take a look at the evolving storage requirements. We'll take a look at the 5 tiers of storage. We're taking a look at it in a slightly different way than we did last time. Then we're going to map the tiers of storage to the requirements, and also map the tiers of storage to the workflow. And let's go ahead and get started. So what's happened in the last 18 months, Nick? What do you think has happened?
I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than frontal lobotomy. It's interesting because you can really compress the last 18 months. Nobody cares about anything that was more than 5 months ago, right? Because it's all been this last 5 to 6 months of, hey, everybody, go home and work from there. And that's a common thread due to our friend COVID, or as you have on screen, Corona. And so it's been a mad dash for all of our clients and their clients of how do I do what I did before, but do it from home? on home network infrastructures, on home internet connections, on remotely with my clients, with my partners and my coworkers. How do I do what I did, but do it from my house with my kids screaming in the background, with my cat walking across my keyboard, with, all the what ifs.
Yeah, and I think now that we're seeing people have started to see what the future is going to look like. I think at first, about 6 months ago when we initially spoke about this, there's still a lot of unknowns, a lot of unanswered questions. Now people are realizing that, hey, these remote workflows and working remotely is here to stay for the foreseeable future for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there are some, if you look at the large tech companies that, where they've now opened up the concept of, well, this works, it's cost effective, let's go ahead and continue doing it, right? Let's maintain this work from home environment because it's allowing them to, programmatically change their employees' lives by allowing them to work from different locations. I mean, if you're a Bay Area native, you know what traffic is like every day, or if you're down in LA, you know how horrible it is to get around town. And the concept of being able to work remote and work from a different location could be life-altering, in some regards. And so now we're starting to see some of the larger companies say, okay, we're going to continue this thread. We're going to allow people to work remote permanently, which means infrastructure is going to become super key to how do they distribute content, how do they distribute media, how do they collaborate. And so you can't do it on your traditional infrastructure. It's got to completely change.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the ongoing challenges of video content. So what you see there on the right were really the points that we focused on the last time we did this 18 months ago. But now, in the last 6 months, I think we touched upon this in the first version of this webinar, but now for sure, content and assets must always remain online. I assume you agree with that statement, Nick?
Yeah, in one form or another, they've got to be, and maybe not online, but accessible. Right, we've got to be able to get to them somehow or another, because if you don't have somebody in the office pulling tape and being able to ingest content on the fly, then you've got to have access to them in some form or another. So I think online is an easy way to say that, easier than you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if we take a look at the storage world just as two targets, maybe your primary target, your secondary target, that's kind of what we're going to look at first here. So if we take this notion of assets must remain accessible, assets must remain online, we take a look at primary storage. A lot of primary storage is based upon a file system or even block-based storage, and those systems just weren't designed to be accessible over the internet, right? They were not designed for remote collaboration, and that's what we see a lot of people struggling with, correct?
Yeah, no, most of those large storage infrastructures are designed around either fiber infrastructure or 10 gig Ethernet infrastructure. So it's designed around a very high-speed, high-capacity network infrastructure that you put in so that your editors have a great experience, right? You can't have delays from the time you hit the playhead to, in making the decision. So it's all designed around creating this super fast, highly, collaborative work environment where everybody can see the content, can access the content in real time, and can edit it in real time without having to move files around. Well, that's all based on that infrastructure that you build. More money goes into the infrastructure often than into the storage because you're talking about custom switches, fiber connections, and long fiber poles, and all this work that we do to connect the user's workstation to the storage. And then we lay MEMS over the top of it and automation over the top of it. So it's all about building this infrastructure that only works inside the building. And the moment you tell that editor, go home, it breaks. It no longer works. So we have to completely rethink now, what does that access look like? Because you don't get high-speed access from a home Comcast connection. In fact, they're metering you, at your home connection. So you don't get to download unlimited copious amounts of data, especially when you got 5 kids home watching Netflix at the same time. So we have to really rethink, what does access mean? And where am I accessing it? And am I downloading the files? Am I moving the files? Am I just previewing the files remotely? So that whole concept of connecting to the storage remotely needs to really be dug into to determine, what is that experience going to be like. Because going home and assuming you're going to get the same editorial experience from a hard drive that you brought home with you is probably not going to happen, right? So you have to be able to remote access the content, and then within that remote access experience, what am I accessing? Because trying to pull a high-res, uncompressed video file and remotely view it is not going to be easy on these home connections. I guess the biggest thing that we've learned through this process, Adrian, that's been interesting for me is network infrastructure, because we talk about access, but we don't talk about we don't always talk about the connection that we have. And we're very comfortable right now in saying, oh, I've got gig to my house, right? Or I'm on this, this great, Comcast cable connection, or pick your provider of choice who's feeding your home. But we don't think about like what's in our home in terms of the network switches, and is that connection that we have robust, and what do we do if I was talking with a guy from the NFL who had to pull in his own internet connection into his garage because his kids were watching Netflix and slowing down his ability to pull and perform remote interviews, right? We don't think about the network infrastructure at our own homes. And what is that data line that we're connecting back to our home base on? And then the worst part about it is, what about metering and caps within that data infrastructure? Many service providers, they turned it off for a time, for a window, but they're starting to turn the meter back on and saying, well, we're limiting how much bandwidth and how much data you can download to your local house. That's really hard if we're pulling large uncompressed files to be edited locally at our own house, right? You could blow out your data cap in a day if that's the case. So there's really a lot to be thought through on this one, on the process of how are we managing this data and this remote access? And it's more than just getting access to the content.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that my cable bill went up this month, so the cap is definitely back on here in San Diego. And if we take a look at secondary storage, we have some similar challenges on secondary storage, but a lot of the time secondary storage, some of it was designed to be accessible, like object storage, and some of it was designed for more economical storage, like tape. We'll go into the different tiers of storage in a bit. But this is what we're really seeing as the breakout or the acceleration from an archive perspective, the real acceleration of the use of active archive versus cold archive. What are you seeing, Nick, in the market?
Well, yeah, I mean, the active archive, it suddenly becomes the better choice because it is designed to be connected to remotely. It's got the APIs to allow you to extract data in various ways that doesn't require you loading a tape, right, or calling up a tape, and it's got a more instantaneous response. It effectively is a cloud-like feel, in an active archive, but it can be run off the cloud as well as on the cloud. So that experience of being able to dynamically pull files and grab files and look at content without waiting for a tape to load is what has sort of pushed the idea of, I need to be looking at active archive. And as we see later in the diagrams, there's reasons why it makes sense, right? Cost effective, cost per terabyte, capacities, capabilities, all these things that sort of are pushing clientele to say, I need a cloud-like experience, right? But I don't want to pay for a cloud-like price tag. I can't achieve that with a cold archive because it's cold. I can only do that with an active archive.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll go into that in a bit. Well, we take a look at the new challenges for the era of COVID or the pandemic era, and then we take a look at the digital video storage requirements. So this is how we look at the characteristics or what's needed for a particular tier of storage. And in a bit, we're going to go ahead and map workflows and different use cases to these requirements. But do you have anything to add here, Nick, from a speed, initial use, reuse, and DR perspective?
No, I think it's a great concept that people need to use to evaluate their sort of their priorities, right? It's what are our priorities? Is it speed? Is it first time use? Is it accessing old content? Or is it archive, right? Or is that data retention, data redundancy, depending how you want to look at it, right? And so this is a good metric to kind of sit down and evaluate what you're doing and what your primary uses are, right? So when you look at your content, using this roadmap against your content, do I need high speed access? Am I only looking at it for first time use, or am I needing to access this content content, it's a good roadmap to kind of decide, where does my content go, right? Is it sitting on the first tier, the second tier, the third tier, the fourth tier, the fifth tier? Where is my content living, either initially or simultaneously? And you can sort of apply this concept to your data and start to model your data based on these 4 quadrants. So it's a good one that everybody should have in their back pocket, right? And sort of use this on a regular basis to constantly evaluate, how am I accessing my data and how am I treating my data against these initial metrics. And certainly you can go much, much deeper, but it's a great place to start.
Yeah, it's a primer. It's just sort of for people to look at. It's just a different way to view. I'm sure everyone has their own unique view. And once you have that, you take a look at the actual 5 tiers of storage, correct?
And just to go back for a second, I think most people don't go beyond it. I think honestly, it's for a lot of environments, they're happy to get storage. Oh, cool, we have storage. Thanks, we're good now, right? And it's like, no, you gotta constantly be evaluating how you're using your storage. Is it cost-effective way of using it? Do I need to add another tier that's going to save me money downstream? So it's one of these things where you almost should just set a calendar appointment for every 3 months to look at your storage, run metrics, and say, am I using it efficiently, right? Am I using it to the best of its advantage, right? And what could I be doing different? To put it in and just say, cool, we're good, and walk away from the table, you're doing yourself a sort of a injustice by not reevaluating every couple of months how you're doing it.
Yeah, that's a good rule to follow. A little checkup, a little quarterly storage checkup. And here are the 5 tiers of storage. And before we lumped cloud into kind of more the archive tier, but 18 months changes a lot. I mean, arguably 18 months ago, all of these different tiers of storage were also available in the cloud, but that's how we're differentiating this time around. You have the different storage devices, and then you have cloud. And cloud is really a service-based, more of a business model approach where you can get all of these different types of storage. Correct, Nick? Do you have anything else to add here?
No, I think it's a good call. So, and more than ever, we've got people separating sort of the archive, because cloud is is being just used way more now than it was before. So it's even though it had a life of its own before, people were making the decision of one or the other. Now we're seeing more people doing both. It's not a one or the other, it's a both and, right? I have this plus, or I'm using both because, right? And so I think it's important to separate them.
Yeah, and we'll go in. Even though we have the cloud separated, we do go into the pros and cons of the cloud. And with that, let's start taking a look at the specific storage technologies. You want to walk everyone through NVMe?
Yeah, so I mean, NVMe is sort of I don't want to say it's burgeoning technology. It's been around for a while. A lot of people have it in their laptops. They just don't know it. It's what a lot of the M2 storage drives are built off of. So it's not fresh, but what we're seeing now is sort of over the, I guess maybe over the last 18 months and kind of coming into this, we've seen a lot more NVMe appliances hit the market. And so to understand NVMe, it's a very, I guess if I were to break it down to its simplest concept, imagine taking RAM, which is designed to be the most, the fastest part of your computer, and then creating a storage device out of it, right? So RAM forgets itself every night or every time you reboot the computer, whereas NVMe remembers what you gave it, right, and the data. So it's as fast as RAM, and often cases much faster. Now, if you take multiple drives that are based on NVMe and put them together, you have something that's faster than pocket lint. It appears before you even know it's there. So it's extremely fast storage technology, but because of that, because it's cutting edge or bleeding edge in this case, it's also the most expensive storage technology. It has the higher speeds, the lower latency, but it also requires a greater network infrastructure because traditional infrastructure isn't going to carry the data fast enough. So that's one of the things we talked about, like upgrading your infrastructure. This is one of the things that sort of forces an upgrade inside that infrastructure to get beyond 10 gig into the 50s and 100 gig Ethernet connections. But it comes at a high price tag. It's much more expensive for the amount of capacity you get. But it's one of those things that if you need it, you need it. There's just no going around it. To quantify and build an array fast enough on traditional spinning disk would take up far more space and be far more expensive in the end than buying the correct NVMe array that gives you the speeds you need to achieve, we're talking 8K workflows uncompressed, and now 16K video workflows that are coming into play in some of the larger film kits. Well, this is what's required to really achieve the speeds and feeds capable of editing this content in real time. But again, it comes at a cost, but it's not something that needs to be your entire architecture. The whole point of this conversation is there's these tiers, right? And this is just one of your tiers. And because of the cost of of the capacity, you don't build a massive tier in NVMe. It's not like you do, hundreds of terabytes in this. You do a very small partition in NVMe to handle those onlines, those applications that require it. And then the next tier is really the one where you're going to build your greatest capacity. So yeah, jump into the next one if you would.
Yep.
Yeah, so then we get into this second tier. Yeah, of getting to the ultra fast, right? Yes, you can still edit 8K. You may not be uncompressed. Yes, you could do it uncompressed if you buy the right stuff, but it's not required. So this ultra fast is really about, can I edit faster than that, Dell server my IT guy keeps telling me to use, right? This is about having a tier of storage that when you hit the play button, the video actually plays, right? When you're scrubbing through the timeline, the playhead keeps up with your mouse at that point, right? So it's about having a good high-speed, SAN or NAS. Now, the network infrastructure isn't as bad on this one. It's 10 gig. It's 1 gig. I've got a lot of environments that still edit on 1 gig because they're using compressed formats, like a ProRes compressed or a DNX compressed. So it definitely changes the infrastructure. And this is the one where we're starting to see the infrastructure emerge, where we used to run a separate network for 10 gig or 1 gig connections direct to the editorial. We're now starting to see the standard network and the storage network come into the same, where it's just one connection to my computer instead of two, in the past, unless you're needing 10 gigs simultaneously. This one still has a high cost of ownership because the drives are more expensive, the arrays are more expensive. The capacities can get much larger with this one. 10 gig or 10 terabyte and 12 terabyte drives are pretty common now. So you can build these pretty high capacity arrays, but they're faster drives. They're faster backplanes, so it is a more expensive array, but it gives you capacity and performance that you're not going to get in the other tiers, when you talk about performance. The previous tier, you're not going to get the capacity. You'll get the capacity in this one, but you're not going to get the same performance. Now, in the end, is this fast enough for 80% of the editorial jobs out there? Absolutely. That's why everybody uses so much of this one, of this, ultra-fast NAS and SAN. And there's lots of players in the market that, that are in this space. They all differentiate themselves by the software they put on the array. And that's what really changes what the experience for the end user is, as it grows or, as they're using it. But it's a needed piece. Now, this is the one that's struggling the most, though, right now, because you're not going to get that speed off the LAN from home, right? You're not going to access it in the same way. And so this is the one that, we see a lot of development on right now, is how do I get access to this content right here from off my network, from home, right? And how do I keep from duplicating files, because I might be pulling them down to my local drive at my house and then pushing files back, and we're seeing a lot of redundancies and capacities are filling up because they're just not efficiently being managed because they weren't designed to be managed remotely, from home, or they weren't designed to be used remotely, I should say. But there's some good workarounds on that. We see some development from guys like NS have developed Nomad, which is allowing you to do remote editorial, but the Nomad application is managing the sort of the dedupe and the files, so it's pulling the correct files down or pushing the correct files back and forth between the home edit station and the primary storage. It's allowing things like proxy creation and only proxy pulls. So, proxy editing is one of the things that's really taken a big leap forward in the past couple months because it's a much more efficient way of working than working off the high res. So Nomad's done a great job of managing proxies and allowing the editors to pull proxies, edit off of those, and then do a final conform off the high res later. So it's a good growth market right now.
And that brings us to NAS and filers.
NAS and filers, right? Okay, so this is a good one. So this is not something you're probably going to edit off of, but everybody needs some of this because you don't, as we talked about those other two tiers being very costly and you don't want to put all your eggs in that one basket, right? So you're not going to run all your content on an NVMe array. You're only going to put the fastest content on that. Well, the same is true for your high-speed NAS. You're not going to leave all your content on the high-speed NAS, right? Because as you finish a project, there's no point in leaving it there. Or if you've got files that are used commonly that, are slower files like still images and things that don't require that high-speed throughput, this is a great place to put those files and manage that content, right? Because it's also a great place to do review and approves with your other staff, right? So this is good all-purpose storage to kind of hold everything, but you're not going to be editing from this unless you're a small shop, right? And you just have one person and you're using very compressed formats. It doesn't, but these can get really big, right? This is a great place to park the content when it's not being used. It's a great place to have a MAM scour the content and manage your proxies and all your other places. So this is just a good general purpose holding pen for all the content that is not currently in use or is waiting to be used, right? It's going to be coming online later. And this is a good place to put it. And it's much more cost effective from that regard.
Yeah, and we're looking at the up and coming challenger, right? Object storage. So
yeah, okay, this is the cool one, and this is the one I think you start this one, and then I got some things to add to this I think are going to make more sense for today, where we're at right now, in the COVID market, shall we call it?
Yeah, absolutely, and maybe we're about to say the same thing. I don't know. We'll see. But if you go back to the ongoing challenges that we started with, content always being online, that's really where object storage shines. So if you take a look at the cost per accessible terabyte, object storage is always going to be your most economical option. We're going to take a look at tape in a bit. Tape is traditionally your archive tier of storage, but what we're really seeing in object storage is this ability to make your archive active. Active archive is a term that is very well known in the storage industry, but when in the M&E industry and sports video industry, it's not all that well known. It just means that your archive is now accessible. All that data is accessible, usually over HTTP. I think now we're seeing the de facto standard being S3. But if you're looking for on-prem S3 enabled storage, object storage is really the way to go. You bring a lot of the benefits that we see in the cloud from a hassle-free management perspective, and you bring that all in-house. If we take a look at some of the cons here, object storage is really optimized for throughput. So that goes to some of the editing use cases you're talking about, Nick, where you really need file locking and you need the ability to storage that's optimized for input-output operations or IOPS. That's not object storage. Object storage is now is optimized for throughput, but the good news is most applications now support the S3 API, and S3 is all about throughput versus IOPS. Of course, you do need a data center if you're running object storage on-prem. I think most people realize now that all cloud storage services run object storage, or they have an object storage option. So of course, all of this is also available in the cloud. And object storage may require some form of HSM or data mover. So that's what I have to say about object storage. Nick, what do you have to say about object storage?
Okay, what I got to say about object storage is this is fun. So everybody's using object storage whether they know it or not, right? I mean, that's the truth of it is if you don't think you're using object storage, you probably have files in Dropbox. Dropbox is backed by an object storage. You're putting things in Amazon. You're putting things in Azure. You're putting things in locations that are cloud-based that have those same RESTful APIs that you're talking about that are based on the either the Azure or the S3 architecture, but effectively you're interfacing with an object store. It's just not your object store, it's one that you're renting on a monthly basis, right? And the problem is exactly that. You're renting it on a monthly basis, and you're paying to get the content in there, and you're paying the content to get it out of there. While in theory that's great because all you're saying is I'm making the data center somebody else's problem, not mine, you already probably own a data center or you have a closet with your IT infrastructure. And fundamentally, if you're thinking that, hey, look, we need a cloud-based workflow, and when you start thinking about your content long-term and the amount of content you're going to be moving, it's much faster to create and become your own cloud, right? To run your own object store, to be able to access the data faster, both on-prem and off-prem, because you control it at that point and control your connectivity, but also be able to move content between your tiers, right? Because if we're talking about taking a half petabyte of storage that's on-prem and vault it up to the cloud, that takes time. But if you're talking about a half petabyte of storage and move it from one side of the room to the other over 10 gig connections so that it can sit on your object store, that's a completely different story. And now suddenly active archives, you talk about, it becomes a completely different story, because we all know that a tape takes time to load, and we're going to talk about that obviously on the next slide, but object store doesn't take as much time to load. It doesn't have the same latency of finding a tape and loading a tape. So this concept of being your own cloud provider is what I love about object storage, because if the theory of everything that Amazon is doing for you is amazing, then why not do it for yourself? Right? Why not own it yourself, manage it yourself, and also manage the long-term costs of it yourself? Now, that doesn't mean this isn't a both-and conversation, because there will be times when you say, hey, look, I need to distribute this media worldwide, and so I'm going to place a chunk of that data up in a platform like Amazon or Azure or one of those, right? But you don't have to run your entire object store on their servers. You can run it on your own as well. That's what I got to say.
And we go over. Well, that's a lot to say about that, and we go over some of those benefits and the pros and cons when we hit the cloud here in a bit. But that does bring us to the next kind of traditional archive tier, which is tape. So what do you have to say about tape?
Well, look, tape is good. Tape is solid. You can throw it off of a desk, and it's going to survive better than a hard drive. It's about capacity at cost. It does have a little bit of lock-in, right? Because as you migrate in, upwards in your tape versions, right? As we move from LTO 4 to 5 to 6 to 7, and they've already specified the 9s and the 10s, right? You have some backwards compatibility, so you always have data migration that's happening from old tape stock to new tape stock. But you do get unlimited tape capacity. That's not a bad thing, right? Because you can, when the tape fills, when your library fills, you empty it, you put more stuff in that library. You can put more empty tapes in that library, and it just continues to grow. It's phenomenal for that. It's really, for me, it's a great true cold archive, because you can take that tape out of the library, stick it on a shelf, and then pick it back up years later, and it should still work. Now, there is a fall-off rate, on tape. They say, there's something like 25 years before you start to see degradation if they've been maintained in the proper environment. But that's one of those pieces where tape gives you that true archive sitting on something that shouldn't corrupt and that should survive, a decade or more, and be able to hold a lot of data. I mean, the current tapes, what are they, in the 20 terabytes or 25 terabytes per, I forget with all the standards, there's too many of them right now, but it can hold a lot of capacity inside the tape. But as I mentioned earlier, there is time, one of the cons for me is if I'm in a hurry and I need a clip to be on air right now and I've got to wait for a tape to load, I'm already dead in the water. Where I can achieve that much faster with Object Store or with NAS, right? Where I can get to that asset much quicker and move it to the tier of storage I need. Because if it's in a library, I have to wait for it to pull that tape, load that tape, then spool the data off of that tape. And that takes time. So this is not one of those things where if I'm in a hurry up and wait environment, this is going to be good for me. If I'm okay with data retention, with archiving and moving my data to cold storage and saving it for whatever disaster comes up later in life, this is a great storage technology for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a question.
Oh, we had a question.
Tapes. Yeah.
Not videotapes, data storage, tape backup.
Yeah.
If you're still doing videotape, let's have an offline conversation. Data storage for sure.
Yeah, JB&A can hook you up, digitize your entire infrastructure. But from a tape perspective, it's interesting that the latest innovations really have to do with putting object storage as a caching layer in front of it. I think if we take a look at the evolution of the market, that's what's really happening, and you can do that with just about any object storage solution in the market these days because of the S3 protocol. Again, I think we like to talk. Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, you're right, because a tape doesn't have an S3 API or an S3 interface because it's a physical piece of media that has to be spooled and spun and rewound and fast forwarded. So you need, because it can only take so much data at once, and most people when they archive way more than the tape throughput can handle unless you're running an array of tapes. So that object store front end gives you that experience of dealing with a traditional file system, because a tape isn't a file system. It's a place the file system lives, right? And so yeah, that object store front end that we're seeing on some of these LTO manufacturers is by necessity, because unfortunately you broke everyone when you gave them an S3 API, right? Everybody loves that experience, and everything we do is about experience, right? The way we interact with our files via a folder is about the experience versus, running a hash key against them or trying to do everything from a DOS prompt. I mean, everything in our evolution of computers is about the experience of interacting with the files on that computer. And tape doesn't give you that experience. That is an enjoyable experience. So you have to put something in front of it to give it that enjoyable experience. And object store, a front end like an S3 API or a folder-based view, capacity of managing those files, that's why everybody's putting that in the front.
Yep, for the enjoyable experience. So object storage brings joy. I guess that's how we can wrap that slide up. And that brings us to cloud storage. So we have cloud storage as an overall, really a service model, a business model. I mean, we can go into cloud storage for each one of these tiers, since all those tiers of storage are available on the cloud. But you want to walk everyone through this slide, Nick? Cloud storage? Yeah,
cloud storage is basically you saying, I want to make it somebody else's problem, right? So you're paying somebody else to build a data infrastructure, to build a IT closet, and then you're going to rent it from them. And there are different ways you can achieve cloud storage. There are cloud storage vendors like Amazon and Microsoft and Google and all those where you're going to rent onto their data centers. And then there are private data centers like the Switch and some of these others that are basically allowing you to put your hardware in their data closet, or they'll rent you, their data servers. So there's lots of different ways, but inevitably in the end, it just means somebody else is going to build a computer and house my data for me, and then give me different ways of accessing it, right? From FTPs to SFTPs to REST APIs, all these different ways that I can look at the content, right, and manage the content. The nice part is I can light up an account and throw some files at it and get a very small bill day one. And then as my data needs grow, so too is my bill going to grow. It means I don't have to put in a bunch of hardware on my own location. It also means I have unlimited capacity, because the more data you want, no problem. They're going to keep chucking spare space at you because you're going to be paying for it. And so you can grow this thing as much as you want. But that does bring this ongoing compounding cost problem, right? The more data you put in there, the more it costs you. There's also a fee to pulling your data. And this is one that I think a lot of people don't realize out of the gate. If you're new to cloud, you pay for egress and ingress, right? You're paying to put the data up there and hold it. You're paying to pull the data down. Yeah, there's a ton of newer upstarts in the industry that, like Wasabi's and others, that aren't charging you both directions, but they also don't have all of the features and option sets, like running your own VM servers, and they're just pure storage players. So, there's pros and cons to those environments. But the other aspect of this one that I always want people to look at is, I think everybody needs some cloud in their life. And one thing, you're not going to hear me say, don't buy cloud. You're not going to hear me say, don't put your content in the cloud. What you're going to hear me say is, choose. This is sort of like the storage conversation that I started all the way back to NVMe. You're not going to put all your content in NVMe. It's too expensive. And it's designed for very specific purpose, just like you're not going to leave all your content in the NAS, right, or the high-speed SAN. Every piece of content you have needs to be evaluated and decided, where is it? Where does it need to be? Right now, the stuff sitting in cloud for you should be as a cold storage or things that you're actively distributing to end users, clientele, editors, whatever it is, right? Because you're paying for it, so it needs to be something that's actively being used. If you're using cloud as just a place to dump data, you're probably paying for something that you didn't need to pay for, right? And so it's understanding where the value of cloud is for your workflow and choosing where to implement it versus just dumping stuff up there because it's suddenly not your problem anymore, and and it's a place to put it. And that's where I want people to think about cloud is, where does it affect my workflow, and how can I exploit the aspect of cloud versus just using it because I don't want to deal with the problem myself, right? Which could be a good thing. Some people don't want to deal with the problem. That's fine, but you're paying for it regardless. So you can either pay for it once with Object Store on-prem, or you can pay for it constantly with Object Store in the cloud. That's kind of the way I want to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of brings us to the next series of slides. Mapping these requirements to video storage and to workflows. So let's go ahead and And let's take a look at video storage mapping to requirements, to those initial requirements that we took a look at.
Yep.
So
yeah, and so I think this is clean. You break it down. Yeah, you break it down really easy, and this is as you start to quantify your data, right? What do I need? Do I need speed? Well, then you know you're going to be at the far left side of that tab. Do I need, archive and sort of cost, lower cost storage? And then you're going to be at the far right of that one. And so I think you've done a great job of sort of breaking down the strengths of each of these, right? And, 3 dots being super strong, 1 dot or no dot being sort of weak. Obviously, as I said, you're not going to archive on NVMe unless you got a lot of money. And you got a root on your logo, and so too you're not going to run NVMe, or tape as your editorial application because tape is not going to give you that level of speed. So it's a nice sliding scale. Now it's not a perfect line. There are products like Object Store which can kind of float and do a little bit more. We see applications with Object Store where they're doing direct play out in the cloud or direct play out, for OTT and online applications. So it does have, things like Object Store have a little bit wider life than just one thing only. The fact that, could be an AS because you can put an interface in front of it that's a file-based interface rather than just a RESTful interface. So it gives you some more open architecture to play with versus a tape, which is just going to do really one thing, which is dump a file or get a file.
Yeah, and I think if I could point something out that may be rather controversial to other types of storage vendors out there, it would be giving some credit to Object Storage for speed. But we are seeing a lot of direct to unstructured data workflows being primary workflows, specifically in the AI and ML space, where the native interface for a lot of those applications is the S3 protocol or is a RESTful interface. So from a speed perspective, you just can't beat the throughput characteristics of object storage. If I were to call something out that may be controversial, that's what I would call out, that little dot speed, where traditionally 18 months ago, we probably wouldn't have put that dot there.
Part of it is because we're tuned to think of object storage as cloud, because that's predominantly where we see it. And so we're always thinking about the lowest common denominator is my connection outside of my office to the one in the cloud. But there are much better ways to build these. And because you guys have control over your appliances, you can put faster interfaces on them and give a faster connection for on-prem or in the cloud AI and machine learning. And we're seeing more and more machine learning come down to premise as well, which means the initial reason I would have put my stuff in the cloud for machine learning was because I'm using cloud-based architecture to actually do the processing of the content for machine learning. But now that ML language or that specific process can live in a container file on bare hardware in my network, directly connected over 10 gig to my object store, that completely changes the story, right, of how I'm utilizing my object store. It's no longer about cold storage or active archive. It's now about active processing within the object store. And so that, you're right, that completely changes the delta of how we're going to utilize these.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, it brought something jumped in my mind, that S3 the protocol is not object storage. I think there are some interfaces that you can put in front of NAS filers and ultra-fast NAS where it looks like object storage because you're accessing via S3, but inherently you're going to have some performance limitations from a throughput perspective, because what you're actually doing is you're going and translating everything back to the file system, stitching that file back, stitching all those inodes back, then delivering that object. It may work great with a handful of files, but when you start to do stuff at scale, that's when things are going to choke. So if you're taking a look at an S3 interface in front of an ultra-fast NAS or filer, just keep that in mind, that the performance characteristics of a native object storage solution, and there's a handful of them out there in the market, is always going to perform better from a throughput perspective for S3 specific use cases. Right.
Yeah, and there's some interesting technologies out there. So I've been watching and testing a product called LucidLink, which is a caching server designed for editorial off the cloud, right? And this is, one we're seeing a lot of right now. It's like, why can't I just put my files in the cloud and edit them? And when you look at who's doing that out there, there are some great technologies for cloud editorial, but they truly are renting a computer in the cloud, because the computer processing the data is also directly connected to the storage in the cloud, and you're effectively VPNing or remoting into that computer so that you can have the same type of editorial experience you're accustomed to at home. But then you've got somebody like LucidLink that's saying, well, rather than that, why don't we pre-cache the files in a faster service in the cloud, and then allow you to edit those remotely, so that they're sort of the intermediary between the object store and the editorial file system, and it also presents the data as an editorial file system, or as just a plain old file system versus as an object that has a code that references it. So there is some interesting technologies coming online right now that are enabling better cloud-based workflows, but they don't have to be tied to the cloud. They could be tied to on-prem object store, so that you're not paying that rental fee on a regular basis. But yeah, there's definitely some changes in how people are interacting with the cloud, and not seeing it just as an archive or an active archive, but as a workflow tool enabling you to process and manage files.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a different, now it's being treated as a different location, a different platform to run all of your workloads, which I think there's a lot of value there for organizations. And that brings us to, mapping workflows, mapping video storage workflows to the different storage devices that we've covered. So you can see all the different workflows there. This isn't an exhaustive list. So what do you have to say about this slide, Nick?
Well, I think this one is a much cleaner line, right? When we look at it, there's a fall off with this one that's much, much faster than the other one, which gets a little muddier because there's ways that the storage can be used. You're definitely not going to edit off a tape, which is why they're flat lines on the bottom there to the left, and you're not going to archive on NVMe or ultra-fast storage. So when we look at these different types of workflows, you've got really, I mean, these are everybody's life right here, right? We're either editing live content, figuring out how to reuse old content, or posting content to be replayed over and over again. So in all of these, how are we going to use these different tiers of storage for these different types of workflows? So if we just start at the bottom, with DR and with mastering, or filing off the content for later, we're going to eventually move it off of our high-speed tiers. And this is almost a workflow in essence, right? As we look at the top, or, start at the top, if I'm going to edit raw content, I'm going to do it on one of those first 3 tiers. And then as I move through my workflow, right, as I'm reusing old content, I'm pulling it from those tiers or from object storage. When I'm finished with the content and I want to post it and put it out on demand, I'm probably not going to run it in one of those first 2 tiers. Yes, I could, but it's probably going to live in the later tiers, right? It's going to go out for distribution. It's going to go out, we're going to send a link for somebody to download, but we're probably not going to leave it on those first 2 tiers. We're going to put the finished content on one of the later tiers that makes it accessible, but isn't eating up our primary storage. When I'm ready to archive that content, yes, now I'm going to throw it down to one of those last 3 tiers, right? It's going to go on tape, it's going to go on object storage, it's going to go on cloud in the object storage. It might sit on a NAS or a filer, but probably not, only if I plan on reusing it in the short term, right? If I see a life cycle to this content, that means I might have to pull it in 6 months or less, I might pull it off the NAS. But if it's beyond 6 months, I'm probably going to move it to the object or to the tape, at that point. And then that last little bit of archive, right? The completely cold storage, it's only going to live in those last 2 tiers.
Yeah, agreed. And if I were to point at something that may be controversial again, it would be not having a dot for DR master under NAS filer. I think there are organizations out there using NAS filers for disaster recovery or for storing their master copies, but that's really just not using their resources efficiently or effectively. But I could see
look, you guys
look at this and well.
No, go ahead. Finish that statement because I got the perfect follow-on for this one. You're right. Why isn't that there when Dell has made a complete life out of this, right? When we look at, the storage, the primary storage that Dell is selling is that NAS filer, and they're telling you to put everything there. But it's not cost effective. I think that's exactly what we're trying to say. It's like looking at the long-term evolution of your file. A file has a cost to it. And we have to look at as the use of that file, the value of that file goes down, we want to put it on the cheapest storage possible, right? And where is that? Because if it's a high value asset, if it's one that I need to interact with often, it needs to go far to the left. If it's a low value asset or one that's not going to be interactive often, then it's going to go far to the right. And so that NAS one can sit right in the middle because there is some value cost to it. And there's a ton of companies that have been out selling the idea of these large arrays for years, right? That, I'll just keep putting it on our storage. We'll just keep selling you nodes. But then that node gets massive. That storage closet gets huge, right? So for an asset that isn't going to be used except for disaster recovery, or if somebody makes it big and you want to go pull the archive of them, it needs to go far to the right in that story, right? It needs to go out to tape or out to object storage where it's going to take up less space and be more cost effective to store long term.
Absolutely.
And be mindful.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, as I say, video people are pack rats. They never throw anything away. Never throw anything away. I mean, those assets, I might use it once, so let's just put it over here just in case, right? We never throw anything away. I've got tapes and tapes and tapes sitting in cold storage that I just, honestly, nobody looks at SD footage anymore. Why am I hanging on to this? Because I shot it. There was value in the time I spent producing it. We never throw anything away. So we've got to find that cost-effective place to house it long-term.
Agreed. And I think some of the new tools, some of the metadata and image analysis and video analysis applications out there may make that content, that data more valuable in the near future. I think we saw with the pandemic hitting how repurposing content, the organizations that could pivot and put that content out quickly and repurpose it are the ones that are really coming out of this whole or establishing themselves in an entirely new way, better than their competitors. And at least we see that as an ongoing trend in the market. Not sure if you agree or not, Nick.
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing content get repurposed that was OTT content only. It was living in the cloud platforms, like your on-demand locations, your Peacock-style platforms that were produced for that, and now it's coming over to first-run, television, because they need some kind of content right now since things aren't getting produced. But then the same token, going back to old content and adding. We talked about this on one of our previous shows about adding, new life to that content with commentary. I mean, this is something that we used to see only in DVD releases. You'd get the director's commentary. Well, now that content can be repurposed and put on demand, the same way. So revisiting these shows, re-editing them, or just adding new life with new commentary over the top of these shows is powerful, because we need content right now. I mean, there's only so many TikTok videos that can be seen before we just want to go, So, looking for fresh content sometimes is repurposing the old content with a new life, and to a new audience, from that perspective. I mean, my kids are watching old shows right now that they never saw because they were too young when those shows came out, or they weren't born yet, but we're finding new life in those shows, and so it's powerful to have that library available.
Absolutely. We're going to open it up for questions now. Nick and I will continue to talk for the next few minutes. So please feel free to ask your question in the chat window. If for some reason we don't get to your question, we will go ahead and follow up after the webinar. I also want to point you to the attachments and links section. We have some great resources there. JB&A is always very, very good at being an advisor. So if you'd like, reach out to JB&A. You can reach them at sales@jbna.com. If you're looking at object storage in particular or archival storage, we can also help you at Caringo. So just send an email to info@caringo.com or go to our website. But yeah, I think we touched upon a lot of points, Nick. I mean, are there any kind of closing statements or words of advice you'd like to give our viewers today?
No one size fits all, and no one tier of storage should be your answer to everything. It's really about looking at tiering it off. I mean, the concept here of the 5 tiers is super important, is really look at how your data spread goes and putting it in more than one place. And that will allow greater accessibility, will allow greater flexibility in workflows, and also probably protect your data, from the perspective of loss or allow it to be reused. So for me, it's no one size fits all.
And if there's one thing that you've noticed from the storage perspective that's different, I mean, we started off by saying in the last 18 months, but I mean, what's different with storage from the last, in the last 6 months? Well, we'll go ahead and compress that cycle a bit, just to kind of summarize things for people.
Well, I don't think there's anything different with storage. How we interact with the storage has changed. And this comes back to earlier. It's like we always build our storage infrastructures for on-prem workflows, and now we're no longer on-premise. So we have to look at how are we connecting to this storage or to our content remotely, and that's the biggest change. I've seen a ton of push for people that are saying, I'm not buying any hard drives right now, I'm buying cloud storage. I got to put all my stuff in the cloud because we have to access it remotely. I now have all these editors working from home, and they got to be able to get to their storage. Or if they are buying hard drives, they're buying small arrays that they can put on a desk at their home office, right, and move content between there and the primary location. So it's really been about how do I move my data from where I was to where I am now, or access it remotely over a VPN connection. One of the most common ones I've seen is people just leaving a computer at the office and remoting into that computer and doing editorial over VPN. Not always the greatest experience, but sometimes better than the alternative. So it's been about getting access to their content when they can't be in the building anymore. But that's opened up, as you said, or as we mentioned earlier, more and more people are looking at these as permanent workflows. Hey, if this works, why wouldn't I hire an editor anywhere, right? Or why can't my content producers be anywhere? Why do they have to be in this building, right? Why am I paying for such a big space if people can do the same job from home?
Absolutely. There's always a silver lining, and I think that may be it, being able to go where the resources are, where the talent is, and not spending hours on the 405 for those of us on the West Coast. I'm not that familiar with the East Coast, or else I'll throw a freeway out. Do you know any East Coast freeways? Maybe in Boston, New York.
Getting stuck on the GW bridge. That's the worst, man. I don't know. I'm horrible. I'm always on. I go by plane to these places, so I have no clue the freeway. Planes, trains, and automobiles are my gig. It's all good. I'm sure everybody's got their favorite freeway of choice, which right now are empty. The trip to our headquarters, which would normally take me 2 hours, like right now I can do an hour and 15 because there's nobody on the road. I know that dream is going to end one day, and suddenly people will come back out of their shells and start to travel again. But I'm enjoying the fast traffic right now.
Yeah. Oh wow, we're blessed in Southern California to still have traffic, so it's still there. It's back. It's back.
It's back.
Yep.
No, it's good. It's good. That's a good sign. That means people are coming out of their shells. That's what's needed right now to move this economy forward. And more importantly is get them out producing and making content again, because I think that's what's a lot of the content we've seen over the past 2 months has been about remote editorial or remote interview. So REMI production, which is being able to, take an interview from somebody in their home and stream it across town, record it, and then edit that or, produce content out of these remote interviews. And that's been tough for the market because, and that goes back to my infrastructure issue is home internet is not what we thought it was. So many people talk about, I can get fast internet. You'd be amazed at how many people live in places where they still can't get very fast internet. And I think that'll be one of the major driving forces over the next year to 2 years when people start to decide to move. When they're looking at remote editorial, when they're looking at remote, being a remote employee is, am I moving to a place that has good internet infrastructure? Can I get fiber to my house with a dedicated 1 gig line? Can I get a network switch that has QoS in it and the ability to manage the traffic and prioritize the traffic at my house? Will my employer provide me with that network switch that's appropriate for what I need to do? So that, I think, is going to be the driving factor to cities who are saying, we want to bring in these employees, so we're going to build good internet infrastructure. And one of the FCC chair people was talking about this in a recent interview, was this has been a phenomenal stress test on our networks.
Absolutely. And I think maybe you have to change the way you measure home bandwidth from bits per second to how many Zoom meetings and Fortnite sessions and HD videos can I stream at once? I think there's an opportunity there for the broadband providers.
I think that's a great one, right? It's how many simultaneous Netflix, YouTube, and Fortnite streams and video conferences can you have simultaneously? Well, it's an even interesting one because Verizon bought Blue Jeans through this process. I mean, right early in this, Verizon, as this was first starting, bought Blue Jeans, which was a very good video conferencing platform. I know a lot of organizations that use that, and I think that's precisely what they were saying is, hey, look, we can buy something and prioritize its traffic and give people a better experience, which is going to, drive certain Verizon users to want to migrate towards that. And we often think of Verizon as really just a cell phone provider, but they're not. They are a home internet provider as well. And so, this will be an interesting process to watch how video communication changes, based on your internet provider.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that just about wraps it up for us. We did this. It took us 18 months to do the sequel. I don't know how long it'll take for us to make the next one. What do you call the third movie in a series?
Usually the better one, because the second one always goes through a slump, right? And the third one is the better one. I don't know. I think the sequel part 2. Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
Somebody's going to pop into
there
real soon. Yeah. No, oh wait, we got it. No, we didn't. Somebody had it for us. Oh, threequel. Way to go, Sarah. Sarah threw us the threequel.
Threequel.
It will be interesting to see, in 6 months, what does this conversation look like and what are the priority points? Right now, it's getting to our content. It might be in 3 months, how do I get it back and reorganize it? Because as it all repatriates, as we repatriate our data back to on-premise, what happens then? How do we deal with redundancies and duplicate files? And, these are all the things. And so how does object storage play with MAM at that point?
Absolutely. And, again, I just want to point out the email addresses for those of you that have questions that want to follow up with us directly. And I want to thank you for your time, Nick. Always entertaining. Always have a lot of fun doing these. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's always a blast to not talk about the same 10 things that I'm stuck with every day. So I look forward to these.
Someone said trilogy. Yeah, trilogy. That's it.
Trilogy.
Thank you very much.
Boom.
Thank you very much to our viewers too. So I guess this concludes our sequel. It lays the foundation for the trilogy. I guess trilogy assumes like it's all three at once. Anyway, we'll see everyone on the next one. Again, we have some great content on Caringo.com. Just go take a look at our webinars. We have a great brews and bites coming up with Diversified. We'll be talking about a lot of the same things that's going to happen next week. So just visit our webinar section. And that is it for now. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Nick, again. And this concludes our webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, Sarah. Bye.